Welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about a great topic, which is road bikes. For me, I've been a lifelong road rider. I've been part of the Mike's Bikes family as team captain on the Mike's Bikes elite race team for a number of years, and I am, admittedly, I am the FNG here at Mike's Bikes. I started back in November as part of the marketing team, and I've been, waiting for my opportunity to get to talk about the thing that I love, which is road bikes. So for me, I haven't paid a ton of attention to Orbea lately. Not being here at Mike's Bikes, being out in the rest of the world, Orbea hasn't really sponsored a world tour team in a number of years. They sponsored a few teams like UHC over the years or Rally, but for the most part, they've been away from major racing for a number of years. So for me, I always remember back to the days in the early 2000s of Euskaltel, where it was just all logos everywhere on the bike and it was just full gas racing every place they went on the world tour. So that's what I remember about Orbea. So when I started here in November, seeing this bike on the sales floor, I was blown away. For one, it's gorgeous. If you get to see this bike in person, it's beautiful. Great lines, really fantastic stance, all together a package that looks like one of the best bikes on the market. Let's talk about what this bike is for. So when this bike came out in 2019, Orbea said that it was 10% faster due to aerodynamics. It would save you 8 total watts. They said that it was 15% stiffer at the bottom bracket, meaning that when you got on the pedals, you could sprint like an animal. And then they said it was also 10% more comfortable. So if you went over any rough terrain, you'd have the smooth, cloud-like ride that you'd want from any endurance bike. So from that, my guess would be that this is your go-to race bike. But then they also followed that up with, this is your everyday bike, and it's not exactly meant for racing. Now, part of me calls a little BS on that and says that because they're not sponsoring somebody on the world tour, they're trying to position this into the world of an everyday bike. But by those numbers, and by how this bike actually rides in the real world, my bet is that you could race it, you could ride it every day, and you could really turn this into that thing that they're talking about, a bike that you can use every day. Now, on the flip side of that, there is a counterpart to what this bike is. This is the Orca, but there is also the Orca Aero. That is the bike that is full tilt, all stops pulled out to make sure that you're saving every single bit of time in terms of wattage and aerodynamics and all those things that make a race bike what a modern race bike is today. So unlike mountain bikes, I think oftentimes geometry and angles are kind of overlooked in road bikes. And I think for the most part, you see a lot of guys that ride mountain bikes really geek out on that stuff. That's what is the constant argument in the pink bike forums. Road bikes, it does definitely matter. There are some big changes that I think can happen in road bike geometry that make sure that the bike is going to handle well. And when I look at the numbers on this bike and the geometry chart, what I really start to notice is that this bike is built pretty similarly to what most modern competitive road bikes are. For one, there are 7 sizes, and inside of those sizes, you're going to see some pretty consistent things with the other competitive bikes in the market. 73-degree head tube, 408 chainstay, so those are pretty much all the same. The stack and the reach numbers, that's maybe where you start to see a little bit of difference that make this more of a better everyday style of bike. The reach is pretty consistent with what you'd see. So if you ride a normal 56, in this, you'd ride a 57. And in that case, you're gonna see the exact same reach number that you would see from Giant or from Cervelo or from any other brand. The stack height on this compared to some other competitive bikes is where you're gonna see a little bit of a difference. Typically, this Orca, you're gonna see about 20 millimeters taller on its stack than you'd see from traditional competitive race bikes. That can be a good or a bad thing. For me, I've never run my bike completely slammed, but if you're one of those people that needs the smallest, tiniest head tube possible to be able to achieve your fit, this probably isn't gonna be the right bike for you. Frame details. So we've got with us today the highest end, and this bike is what Orbea calls the Orca OMX. There's also a version that is the OMR. Now, the differences between those two are relatively subtle, I think if you're standing a little bit away, but what you're gonna notice is that the OMX version has a Aero D-shaped seat post, it has an integrated fork that meshes into the frame, where the OMR is built a little bit more for compliance and has a round fork up on the front that does not mesh into the frame, and it also has a round post in the rear. Some of those things make it easier for them to produce, which allows them to make that frame still very incredibly comfortable and competitive, but lower the cost. While some of the more complex shapes that you'll see on the OMX mean that you're going to get better aerodynamics, better stiffness, and better integration into the frame. Everybody always wants to know what's the max tire clearance for any frame that they've got. Like I said earlier, this is one of those things where everybody wants to turn their road bike into their gravel bike. So with the OMX frame that we've got here, you can fit all the way up to a 32C tire, which should give you plenty of clearance to fit almost anything you want in. If you're on the OMR frame, you can fit all the way up to a 35, which pretty much means this is a gravel bike as well. So with this OMX frame, it's going to come in around 850 grams for a size 55 or 57. Pretty light. I think in the world of road bikes today, you've definitely seen some that crack the scales in the low 700s, and you definitely see some that are over 1,000. But this feels right in the middle for what you'd see for a modern road bike. Now, coming back to some of the details that I mentioned just a second ago, the OMX frame does have what they call a free-form fork, which is their way of pulling out the fork blades from the wheel to make sure that any turbulence created by the spokes rotating is not affecting the aerodynamics over the frame. Clever way of adding a little bit of that aerodynamic gain that they talk about. You'll also see at the back end trailing edge of the fork, there's integration of where the top end of the fork meshes into the frame, which gives you both a clever aesthetic and does help move some air over the frame. Moving to the back of the bike, you're gonna find drop seat stays, which again, totally a popular thing across many brands today, but also helps with the aerodynamics and also helps with compliance by making sure that you don't have all of the force from that rear wheel blasting right into the top of the seat where you're actually sitting. Once you start looking at the seat post, you'll also notice that it is a D-shape or an aerodynamic style seat post. One thing that I always hate with aerodynamic seat posts is when you've got a seat post clamp that never seems to connect with that shape, which inevitably means as soon as you go and you try to test out that compliance figure that the brand has talked about, that seat post drops down into the frame like a jackhammer drilling for oil. Now, with this, I think Orbea's done a great job. The seat post clamp is integrated into the frame and it actually clamps from both sides to make sure that you've got a really firm connection between the seat post and the frame. You won't experience any slipping here. The last feature that we're going to talk about is the bar and stem. This is a feature that mechanics loathe throughout the world. Integration, as it starts to come on, companies seem to just throw that out there saying, look at how beautiful this is, but not really think about how hard it is to put together. Well, Orbea, I think, has thought this through very well. They do have an integrated bar and stem, but rather than have the cables route randomly through the frame, making it really difficult for the mechanic to work on, they built a clever solution that allows it to bolt right below the stem and then drop in through your top bearing in your headset. Now, this does mean that if you are going to change anything dramatically on the front end, you will need to unconnect the cables from the brakes. No big deal. But you can still have enough room inside of there to make small adjustments. So if you do need to raise your stem, the actual spacers separate to make sure you can put them on and off without having to separate any cables. All in all, a really clean solution to how Orbea has tackled the front end integration. All right, so to pick my favorite of all of the models that are out there, the M20 LTD has to be the one. M20 LTD comes with the OMX frame, which is going to give you the freeform fork. It's going to give you the integrated cockpit and the D-shaped C-post on the rear, which gives you that great compliance as well as some of that aerodynamic benefit. But it's going to pair it with Shimano's brand new Ultegra Di2 kit. So you're going to get the best shifting that you can get. Maybe a little bit more weight than you'd get from a Dura-Ace or a SRAM Red-Equip bike, but you're going to get it at nearly half the cost. So from there, you've got the best of all worlds available in that Orca. All right, guys, so that is the Orbea Orca. I think this bike for me really does check a lot of boxes. It is not in-your-face loud like most race bikes. It's really nice and understated. It's got clean lines and great looks, but it still does have that really great competitive frame. Aerodynamics added in, comfort added in, all the things that you want in a bike that you're gonna ride every single day. So if you've got any questions about this, feel free to stop by any of our stores or get online and you'll be able to reach out to our online sales team. They can answer any question that you've got. Thanks so much for spending time with us and we'll catch you on the next one.